Hello and welcome to week 6 in developmental psych, and the correspondence of week and chapter comes to an end. This is chapter 6 on week 6, but we're also going to be doing chapter 6 in week 7. So this particular video is going to count for 2 weeks, and I'll send a reminder about that in the next week, but I'll be covering all of chapter 6, but it's for 2 weeks of material. Okay, so you can... The first 3 assignments are due in the first week, and the last assignment is due in the last week. So we enter into the extremely fascinating world of adolescence. Now, throughout history, and I really do mean into the ancient world, the vision of adolescence has been one of storm and stress. Now, that actual phrase comes from G. Stanley Hall, the first president of the American Psychological Association, and that characterized this age as a stormy, stressful, full of conflict sort of age. Now, the fact is that along with birth order, and that we only use 10% of our brain at any given time, has fallen into the bucket of things that are not supported by research. In fact, for the vast majority of adolescents, this time is fine. It is a challenging time, but for the vast majority of kids, make their way through this, make those transitions, do some of the things that we're going to be talking about today successfully, get along with their parents for the most part, and it's not as stormy and stressful as we like to think. We sort of imagine this sort of a horrible time. That doesn't mean that individuals have not had incredibly stormy and stressful adolescence, and it doesn't mean that this isn't particularly a risky time for that to happen, but also, truthfully, a risky time because of the kind of risk-taking things that can happen because of the brain development that hasn't quite happened. That's a little hint about what we're going to be talking about today. But for the most part, kids make it through pretty well. And the headlines are the abnormal things. Keep that in mind. The headlines are abnormal things. So when we hear about all these crazy teenagers and stuff like that, it's the abnormal. That's not the norm. Okay? So where we go. True. All right, so let's take a look at possibly another view of adolescence. And this comes from Arnett, published in 1999. This is a name that's going to come up in our next chapter as well. A very brilliant author. In 1999, published a revision of what this, more detail about what's really going on during this time. Let's take a look at this. It is true there are more likelihood that these sort of conflicts with authority and stuff are going to happen at this time than at other times, but it's not all experience, and not all experience is really bad. Culture plays a major role in how this happens. Now, culture, again, meaning not only the grand culture, which can send all kinds of mixed message, but the family culture that helps mitigate between the external culture and the experiences of the child. The importance of the family cannot be underestimated here in terms of help guiding a child through their transition, essentially, to adulthood. And so family is important in softening the blow of that, or helping interpret the outside world so those individuals can make their way through this transition. There can be increases of conflicts with parents. We see that in sort of identity exploration, and in terms of even the cognitive sort of capacities of formal operation that come in, where individuals are able to envision, well, what if my parents were different? This is something that they didn't have in concrete operational thinking, that they now have in formal operational thinking. Could be some mood disruptions and the engagement in risky behavior. But then again, let's look at that second line, those first and second points by Arnett. More than in other times, generally statistically speaking, but not universal. These are not universal experiences. Lots of television shows portray adolescence in its kinds of extremes. So here we have a scene from the latest rendition of It. Here's a group. We have they're all looking except for the one kid. Look at the kid on the left. He's the star here. He's the most thoughtful here, and his girlfriend, the latchkey kid. Just how symbolic this was. This is such a really. Not only is it a good movie about adolescence and adolescent behavior and what, of course, dramatized, but there's a lot of really interesting parts to this movie. Like none of the kids are wearing helmets when they ride their bikes. That you have latchkey kids, that you have, all these things about the 80s, the era I grew up in. I could really relate to some of these kids, sort of thing. So here we have what's going on during this period of time, kind of represented here by this, the group of kids here. We have growth spurts, and you'll see different kids here, different heights and different, there's different growth spurts and the different characteristics between boys and girls. Girls have their growth spurt first. So the horrified junior high school dance, and this is from a short guy, the girls towered over me, and so not only did they have their growth spurt, I just delayed mine for several decades, and but nonetheless, that kind of awkward time of growth. But then at the same time, we're also getting the development of secondary sex characteristics, the development of breasts, armpit hair, pubic hair, those kinds of things. Now these characteristics, along with muscle strength and whatnot, they create a phenomenon of course, puberty that has created some interesting issues based on when it happens. So if we think about not only the growth spurt itself here, I'm trying to get this graphic to work here. We think about the growth spurt and the secondary sex characteristics and the developmental perspective. When it happens, does it happen early, late, or on time? And is there a difference between boys and girls? Now, and there is. This is profoundly evidenced in the literature that there is a profound effect on early and late development for some kids. So let's take a look at early developing boys. Now, early developing boys grew tall, strong, secondary sex characteristics, all of that stuff early. It has been found that this is an advantage to those kids. Those kids become leaders, they become good in sports, they become popular. There could be some dangers in terms of them getting more involved in sexual activity, more adult activity like using drugs and whatnot. But in general, being an early developing boy tends to have a somewhat positive effect on that person. Many industry leaders that are men, presidents and CEOs and whatnot, if you look at their history, there's an unusual proportion of them were early developing boys that were put to the front and stepped up, basically, and took advantage of that particular situation. Now, late developing boys, although there is a bit of conflict that can happen early on, tends not to have a whole lot of effect. Now, I'm going to, self-disclosure here, late developing boy, that's who I was. And of course, during that junior high phase into high school and whatnot, it was awkward, it was weird. I was the smallest kid, really wasn't developing the way my peers did. And admittedly, sometimes it, was challenging and difficult. I had a very supportive family, lots of people to talk to about it. And I developed, used to call it my Napoleonic complex, but Napoleon was actually not, he was of average height. So that whole thing about Napoleon being really small, just totally not true. But anyway, called it Napoleonic complex. I worked harder to excel in athletics, in academics, and all that stuff to kind of make up for that. So it's kind of a wash. Some develop, some are sort of impacted by it. Some, I'd imagine, some profoundly impacted by it, and then others not so much, and sometimes not at all. Okay, we also have early developing girls and late developing girls. Now, I'll say right off, late developing girls, they seem to walk away with this with very little problem associated with this. However, of all of these categories, the early developing girls are the ones that run into the most trouble. Early developing girls have a tendency to be viewed by society as objects of sexual desire way before they are intended to be, or way before they're emotionally ready for that. Even though they're emotionally ahead of boys, certainly, and they pretty much stay that way, that early development can draw the attention of older boys to those individuals and invite them into part of the world that's not necessarily where they want to be. And so of all the groups, this is the most impacted by this. This is the group, of course, highest dropout rate, highest pregnancy rate, highest drug use, all of that stuff. Runaways, it's early developing girls. Very, very high risk. Again, mitigated by supportive family and supports. So we go back to that original statistic of early, late developing. As long as there's a really good support network around that individual, can certainly manage it. All sort of evens out by the time you get into adulthood. So it's just getting through that period of time. Now, one of the most fascinating things that's happening during this period of time is the movement of like a combination of biological development and cognitive development working hand in hand as we're translating into childlike thinking into adult thinking that Piaget referred to as formal operational thinking. We're going to talk a little bit about formal operational thinking, but the first thing I want to talk about is actually some brain development, this important brain development that happens. Now, I want to talk about two parts of the brain. One is the limbic system, which is the emotional-based, self-serving aspect of the brain, impulse, and then the prefrontal cortex, which is the decision-making, higher-order thinking, what's the right thing to do sort of part of the brain. Early on, these are not connected. So the adolescent who has the cognitive ability to examine situations and realize their consequences in that, nonetheless doesn't necessarily connect that when they're in an emotional situation and they want to take risk. And we get this idea of risk-taking coming more often during this age. It's, why didn't you think this through? I know you can think this through. You have that cognitive ability, but yet you refrain from doing it. Now, there is a biological reason, and we're not writing it all off and saying it all is okay because of biology, but there's actually evidence that those parts of the brain are not as connected as they should be, as they will be when those kids become adults. Now, that actual question is now being examined as evidence for as to whether or not a child should be tried as an adult. If there's evidence that the individual's limbic system is connected to their prefrontal cortex based on previous decisions that they've made, then an argument can be made that the decision they made at this point was mitigated through their prefrontal cortex. Therefore, they are culpable, meaning they knew better and they did it anyway. Therefore, they can be tried as an adult. So the legal system working with juveniles is really a rich area to look at if you're interested in looking at brain development in relation to a social problem as fascinating as juvenile delinquency. It's a hot area of research that's going on. So very, very interesting stuff. Now, I want to take a little sidestep on this to take a little look at some classic art. Now, some of you might recognize this. This is on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And what this is God reaching out to Adam, and they're not quite touched. their fingers. In terms of, and we understand from the stories represented in this particular form of art, Michelangelo here, that in the Garden of Eden, the eating of the apple is sometimes seen as a developmental psychologist as the entrance into adulthood, understanding good and evil, being able to discern that. If I think about that cognitively, whether something's right to do, I can make that decision now. So that event that's created in the mythology of the Garden of Eden is actually can be a representation of developmental psych as to what happens at a particular age when somebody realizes they're naked. They realize that they're, all those, higher level ordered thinking comes along, and I can now determine good and evil. And that it happened in the absence of the divine touch. And again, in this world, in this religious world, God imprinting upon human beings his will, his law and whatnot. It was not quite connected, represented in this Sistine Chapel artwork. Now, some analysts have taken a look at this particular image, and what I want you to realize is that the image on the left, look at the shape of the image, and it's sort of like a human brain in its shape. And let's look at that. You got the cortex, you have the brain stem sticking off the end over there. And some people have seen, and look where God's arm is. God's arm is the prefrontal cortex. Evil, id, base, needs, in the complex kind of thing. This sort of thing is happening in this image here, not quite touching this sort of. Some people think that this maybe represents the fact that there is a disconnect between the prefrontal cortex, the will of God, the doing the right thing, thinking things through, good rational judgment and whatnot, and the evil original sin aspect of human beings not quite touching yet. So an interesting analysis of that, where we would see that the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex are not quite touching. So just my little art analysis there about whether or not Michelangelo may have in fact been somewhat of a developmental psychologist. Okay, the next place I want to go is, again, looking at more of our cognitive development and taking a look at yours and my favorite topic, algebra, and why we have to study algebra. There's a little side note on mine about what does algebra represent in our current life, and what it has to do with is formal operational thinking. Formal operational thinking is the final chapter in Piaget's work. We're going to depart from Piaget and look at post-formal thinking later, when we look at what distinguishes adolescent thinking from adult thinking, because there is a prefrontal cortex thing. Now, we have up until now, we have sensory motor development, pre-operational development, and then concrete operational development, which pretty much covers most of our lives. We don't really need formal operational thinking very much, and we ask ourselves, then why do we need algebra? The big $100 question. So, and I'll make the point that it's a sort of an exercise of formal operational thinking. Now, formal operational thinking distinguishes itself from concrete operational thinking, because if you remember when I talked about concrete operational thinking, it was the ability to manipulate schemas in my mind without those objects being there, but it's based on experiences that I've had in the real world. When we have experienced enough of the world and we understand properties and our mind develops and we're asked the kinds of questions and given the kind of environment that challenge us to have this kind of thinking, we can then start to think abstractly. We can start considering ideas that don't manifest themselves in material world, and we can manipulate those things in ways that are impossible in the material world. You can think of that, concretely, like I can make my bike fly around the sun, but I can also think about, like Einstein did when Einstein first developed when he first had the light bulb that went up, no pun intended, of his special relativity. He was imagining himself holding on to a beam of light traveling through space. That's physically impossible, definitively higher order thinking to actually have that imagination, let alone to add some math to it like he did. But we're entering the world of formal operational thinking, which requires abstract thinking, being able to think about things that are not in the real world. We also get things like problem solving, strategies for being able to problem solve it, and using those strategies across different scenarios. The importance of recognizing an unknown, this is a part of the problem solving. We may see a situation and recognize that there's information missing. You've probably encountered situations that are puzzling, and you think, you might try to understand that particular situation, but it seems like you're missing a piece of information here, and that information might be vital to understanding how these pieces all come together. The scientific, mathematical reasoning of finding unknowns, lining up what you do know and solving for X. This is so algebra. This is so process of getting all the information, setting up your, taking a word problem, setting up your formula and solving for X. That solving for the unknown piece that's there. Now, where that leads us is deductive reasoning. Now, deductive reasoning is at this point, this is the elimination of possibilities, and then whatever's left is the solution to a problem or the missing piece. Now, let me explain that a little bit. We see the word deduce and deduction in the famous stories of Sherlock Holmes by Doyle? I tried to make myself look... Arthur Conan Doyle, that's it. Tried to make myself look smart and well-read here. But, he said, it's deduction, Watson. He deduced. Now, in the thinking of Sherlock Holmes, those 5 people, one of those 5 people committed the murder. Now, all I need to do is say, just like in the game Clue, you just make sure that Mr. Mustard or Colonel Plum or whatever, make sure you can prove the other 4 didn't do it, then the one that's left is the one who did it no matter what. That's deductive reasoning. It follows a principle of logic. Now that is the defining characteristic of formal or operational thinking. It is also the Achilles heel. It is the problem with formal operational thinking in terms of adolescent. But let's just stay here for a little bit. We're looking at the basic core skill set of formal operational thinking, abstract thinking, problem solving, unknowns, and deduction, and how important algebra is in this. Now, algebra is similar to lifting weights in the physical world. It's the mental equivalent of lifting weights. So hopefully there will never be a situation where you have to go, bench press your weight in order to accomplish a goal, aside from bench pressing your weight. You bench press or you lift weights or you exercise in order to make your daily activities easier. So when you have to pick up your child, you've been working out, it's not going to throw your back out. You can, be more active. You can run around with them. You can play at the beach. You can do all that stuff. That's why you exercise, so you can do fun stuff. Okay? We exercise algebra in order to create the basic skills of formal operational thinking. It's not the only way. Music does it too. Music is a form of math. that is it's in a different format, operates on different principles, but nonetheless it's mathematics and how tones relate to each other. And that's another way in which formal operational thinking is developed. So you're not just stuck with algebra, but algebra is the purest form of formal operational thinking because it entails abstract thinking. What's an A? What's a B? A C? You've probably learned at the beginning, A is for apples, B is bananas, C is for carrots, whatever. They're variables, they're unknowns, it doesn't matter, but you can still work with them. You can still work with the abstract principles of A, B, and C. I don't have to define them aside from that they're variables. Then the idea of problem solving, that I have to work with these abstract principles in a certain way in order to resolve a problem and therefore solve an unknown by the process of deduction. However, when we're adolescents, this core logic is flawed. It's flawed because prefrontal cortex and the limbic system are not quite connected yet. Practice in the real world is not there. Not enough factors being taken into consideration. The equations of life are very long. The equations of adolescence are very short. So it will sometimes be that an individual who is an adolescent will be frustrated with, let's say, something not happening fast enough or something not going their way because logically that's the way it should be. But it's more complicated than that. And adult thinking, as we're going to see later on, we're going to see in adult thinking emotional factors, individual situations, politics, economics, all those things. These are variables that come in and affect the logical conclusions to the problems that we have in our world. And so one of my favorite ways of demonstrating that was years ago. I was in acquaintance with a person who was the captain of a sailing ship when he was working. He was retired when I knew him. And he would take, during the droughts in Africa, his ship was taking materials over to Africa in order to, the West was supplying food, primarily in his adventures, soybean oil, which is a key food ingredient, bringing it over to Africa to help feed the starving millions. Of course, there's a lot, America, breadbasket of the world, we have so much food, so much of this, high productivity, give it away, and that's what we were doing. He would bring it over there, and he would have all those products put onto the dock and come back, get some more, and when he went back the next time, they would bulldoze all the products that were there and put them in the ocean, and he would dump off another one, and he's like, what's going on here? Well, there were no roads to go in. Africa's a really big place. You can take 3 entire continental United States and fit them inside the continent of Africa. Even flying over various countries' airspace, people that would be in conflict with each other, shooting your planes down. You might want to take a truck all the way on the interior, travel thousands of miles. Where are the gas stations along the way? None. These kinds of logical problems that say, why don't we take the food that we have here extra and just give it away, are truncated by the fact that there are logistical problems for actually making that happen. This sort of resulted in this sort of chaotic experience that this person had. Now, in addition to that flawed logic in terms of not taking into the kind of considerations of adult thinking, there's also some characteristics of adolescent thinking that get in the way, that have been outlined by a researcher by the name of Elkind, David Elkind. He talked about adolescent egocentrism. This was a quality of adolescence thinking that is formal operational, but not adult level yet. So the logic is flawed. One aspect of adolescent egocentrism he called imaginary audience. And this was the imagined situation of adolescence that whatever's going on around them, it has to do with them. So if they walk into a room, every casual glance in their direction, they think that person is looking at them. They feel like they're on the stage and that they're performing. And now, to a degree, that's true. To a degree, there's a lot of judgment going on. There's a lot of talking. There's a lot of, styles and whatnot, but not to the degree that caused the kind of anxiety. In fact, when you interview adolescents, it's actually, all of them are doing that. Everybody's thinking about, everybody's looking at them, so obviously they're not all paying attention to you. Now, the next flawed aspect of adolescent thinking is the personal fable that we often see in the notion that whatever they're going through, others, aside from their friends, cannot understand. They lose the idea that we as adults used to be adolescents as well. And yeah, we lived in a different world, but we had the same sorts of challenges, and obviously we survived it. So we might have something good to say, but often we hit a wall in terms of their believing that their situation is not as uncommon as they think it is. And the last one here is a sense of an illusion of invulnerability, and it won't happen to me. I'm in control of this situation, an inflated sense of self that can happen from these things all get in the way of a really good application of the formal operational thinking. These things start to disappear when we're going to start looking at emerging adulthood in the next stage. Now, carrying with our tradition here, tradition's already established here in week 6, of covering certain aspects of theory, here we're going to take a look at Erikson. Now, Erikson's 5th stage, 6th week, 6th chapter, 5th stage, to see if we can kind of fit all this together, is kind of the focus of Erikson. I'm actually reading some Erikson right now, and his whole shtick is about identity. And stage 5 is sort of when these blocks all start coming together. And I want to kind of build this from the sense of the first 4 stages. So let's take a look at this theory again. We have from over here on the left, infancy, trust versus mistrust, autonomy, initiative, industry, and then into identity here. I want you to see these first 4 as significant building blocks in developing the identity of the adolescent. So trust in the world, a sense of doing things on their own, a sense of being and taking initiative, and then sort of an evaluation of what am I good at and how do I compare to others, leads us to the template upon which we're going to build this identity. And so now it's just the beginning. Now, for Erikson, it's all about identity. Trust and mistrust is about identity, and it's all, develop ego identity. And he was a Freudian guy, so we're still talking about id, ego, and superego, but ego identity throughout this time. But then here we are in adolescence when our society is sort of expecting you're about to enter, you're moving away from the childhood aspect, going into your role as an adult, and the bigger questions start to ask about how you're going to build your identity, build your adult identity. What is that going to be like? And so these early aspects, trust, autonomy, initiative, and industry, being the basic blocks that build, not really, they're all foundational, but really kind of maybe building the first floor, of what a person's life is going to be like. Very, very formative aspects of this. And now, with formal operational thinking kicking in, the realm of future, the abstract future, consequence, things I do now will affect me later, those are all starting to kick in. And the notion of decision making and creating my own path and doing all these, all of this is probably where some of the stress comes from in adolescence, is making these decisions now, decisions that were made for them right up until that point. But now it's like, okay, which classes do you want to take at school, or what do you want to do when you grow up? And we're asking that question seriously now. What are you going to do when you get out of school? And that making those kinds of decisions. Again, family, support, and whatnot makes a huge difference in all of this. Now, in that sense of identity, the development of identity, I want to insert another theory. So we have Erikson's model of ego development, psychosocial development throughout the lifespan. And here we are in adolescence, and we first actually use the word identity. And I want to introduce you to one of my, I think it's just a very useful theory by James Marcia, and it's called identity status. And what it takes a look at is if you take a snapshot of anybody at any given time, very developmental perspective, just this is, what is it? June 13th, snapshot of Mark Kavanaugh. What's your identity? And you can look at different aspects of my identity, which Marcia divides up, not just one thing. Our identity is made up of many, many different pieces. And each one of those is in a particular status having to do with the actual process of examining the options for creating that particular piece of my identity and committing to one of them. Processes that Marcia talks as crisis, looking at the options, and commitment, selecting one. And that each one of these aspects of my identity can be in a different status today, based on where I'm at with it. So here's a graphic to kind of look at the ways that we can see identity in its relationship to the two processes of looking at the options, crisis, and commitment. So here we have in the top left-hand corner, identity foreclosure would mean this is a piece of a person's identity where a high level of commitment, but they've never really explored. So low crisis, high commitment. And this example is looking at jobs. So here we have an identity foreclosure, this is part of the job identity, high commitment toward the prospect of a new career identity, but low exploration activity. Having accepted the prospect of changing careers, but unmotivated to start the process of job seeking. So the individual, high commitment, low exploration. Then we look at identity moratorium. This is low commitment to the prospect of a new career identity, but high level of engagement in exploring new opportunities. This is low commitment, high crisis. This is when you're actively looking, okay, actively exploring the options. Then we have identity diffusion down on the left corner here. Low on both. This is sort of, low commitment, low, there's my computer doing a little freaky thing again. Low commitment, low motivation. Person might be overwhelmed at the career exploration point at this point, and it's in the back burner right now. And then finally, identity achievement, high commitment, high exploration. This is when we've decided. Now they prevent any aspect of my identity could be in foreclosure, moratorium, diffusion, or achievement. We can look at buying a car. Let's say you're living in the city and you don't really need a car, but you're thinking you might want a car someday, but you're not really doing that. So you're not really shopping for a car, and of course you haven't picked one. So at that point, your car identity is in diffusion. Now then, let's say your parents gave you a car. There it is, it's free. I didn't look for it, but I've got it. So I'm in sort of a foreclosure. It's sort of been given to me, and I've got it. So I've got a car, and now have a car, and I can use it if I want, but I didn't actually choose it. It got given to me. Let's say, no, I'm going to sell that car because I want a car of my choice. I sell that car. I got some cash. I'm going to go start looking actively for a car because now I really want one. That's in moratorium, and when I find it and buy it, I've been achievement. We can look at any aspect of our identity. This is going to lead to my own work that I'm doing on a theory that I call puzzle pieces, where I look at identity the same way that we look at a jigsaw puzzle. And each one of those pieces, which all come together to form a picture, you, me, are subject to being manipulated and changed and being in each one of these status, so that each piece in the jigsaw puzzle could be in a different status. And sometimes we want to take a piece out and cut it and change it. And that's that crisis component. Get into that later. But for now, we see the identity status, the applications of these, that we can use this to understand where somebody is at in terms of the development of their identity, in terms of relationship status, in terms of, and of course, status has become a really big, with social media, putting your status up there. Try using some of these words. Next time, let's say you're newly single, but you're not interested. Just put diffusion. No, your Facebook status, diffused. Let them figure it out. Or you're actively looking, you just put moratorium. That kind of thing. Anyway, enough of that foolishness. Applications of understanding how identity is developed, how identity constructs, the constructivist aspect of identity development, that we can have multiple statuses at the same time. And of course, this leads to my theory that we'll discuss later in the course on puzzle pieces. So identity foreclosure, identity moratorium, identity diffusion, and identity achievement being aspects of different identity. That brings us to our assessments. Chapter 6, discussion A, has to do with that question of juvenile justice and brain development. Let's get some discussion about that. A little bit about your experiences with yourself or others regarding adolescent egocentrism, and a quiz on perspective taking and how that relates to adolescent development. Now, that's the things that are due this week. Week 6 is Chapter 6 discussion A, Chapter 6 discussion B, and Chapter 6 quiz. Next week, you'll be doing Chapter 6 assignment, where you are going to be looking at an aspect of your identity or aspects, plural, sticking a piece of your identity in each one of those areas. I'm going to publish a video that I did specific. It's a video like this about identity status. And it goes into some detail more than I did in this lecture. I'll be publishing that as the weekly video for this class next week. So look forward to that. For now, concentrate just on the 3 things that are due this week. And that'd be the 2 discussions and the quiz. Now remember, for each discussion, you still have that same requirement of posting at least 3 times for each one, not 3 across the 2. So just 3 in discussion A, 3 in discussion B. Participate even more if possible. All right, so that's it for now, and I will see you in the discussion boards, and I'm looking forward to reading your work. Take care.